continue with the lecture, supporting regulated learning with technological applications. And from my perspective, the research unit I work with, it's interested on how we can support learning based on the learning sciences with some types of technological applications. We do not develop technology as such, but we find ways how to implement available technological solutions in order to support learning. So basically, it's integration of theoretical perspectives on social, cognitive and motivational processes, on learning, and utilizing it in research-based design. So in practice, what we aim in the research is to understand the skill and will of learning and design different types of future innovations for learning. But since this lecture is about supporting regulated learning with technological applications, I hope that you have some kind of impression on mind that what does self-regulated learning mean? Who does know? Who do know? Slightly, more or less. Good. So now spend a few minutes and think that how would you characterize good learner, and then think that what do you know about self-regulated learning. Discuss, for example, with your peers so you can kind of relate this lecture about the theories of self-regulated learning. It's also a good discussion to wake up a little bit. Let's continue. So basically the outline of this lecture is that I will describe what are characteristics of self-regulated learning, and then I move on to defining somehow supports that are typically applied in order to support learning in technology-enhanced learning environments. Yes. So So, what is self-regulated learning? Many times when you start to read some type of articles, you first find definition that self-regulated learners are characterized as active participants of their own learning. But I don't think that there is a definition like self-regulated learning. Self-regulated learner, because all the students are self-regulating their learning in some extent. But when and how, it varies. So self-regulated learning is active and proactive learning. It means that person is in charge of his or her own learning, but also thinks about different options, how he or she can change the current situation so it would go even better. And it's a process where learners monitor, evaluate and regulate or change their own learning and thinking, motivation or behavior. So basically where learner changes learning strategies, becomes aware of his or her own motivational variables, and also thinks different ways how to organize, for example, a learning environment or a task. And it's a lifelong process that can be developed over time. But the good news is that self-regulated learning, it can be taught and it can be learned for all the students. Well, this is kind of basic model what are the phases of self-regulated learning. So basically, self-regulated learning process can be divided in 3 to 4 different phases depending on the model. So in the first phase, kind of planning phase, learners activate their current task understanding, set different types of learning goals and plans their learning. And during the execution phase, the learners can control and monitor their learning. Basically, it means that learner evaluate whether the task understanding was correct, whether the strategies he or she is using is aligned towards the task goals, or maybe the learning goals that were set in the first place were too high or too low. So basically it means changes. And finally, after reflecting or evaluating, learner can change his or her perceptions of the task in the next tasks. So basically it's an adaptive process. Learner can adapt the strategies and thinking during the one learning situation or over the learning situations by engaging to reflecting and evaluating. But self-regulated learning, it's not easy. There are many different types of challenges. The learners are not probably interested about the task. The task might feel irrelevant. Or maybe the learners just don't know how to approach different tasks. So, in our research unit, we have been identifying what types of challenges, for example, higher education students typically confront in their learning. There was something wrong with the slide, but never mind. So, these are the different types of challenges. For example, if you think that regulated learning can target into motivation, cognition or metacognition or behavior, the challenges also that higher education students confront can be labeled to those different kinds of categories. For example, cognitive or metacognitive challenges are related to task understanding, task difficulty, and also strategies. Motivational challenges instead are related to things like how to get started with the task, and feels like a task is starting to repeat itself. And also there are different types of, how do I say, external distractions. Maybe it's some kind of holiday that is coming, so students just can't concentrate because of that. And of course, environmental challenges are also types of behavioral challenges, because you can also maybe regulate your learning environment by changing that and using behavioral strategies. But there are 6 serious challenges in self-regulated learning. So one is that motivation is, for example, typically considered a static attribute. If you are not interested, then you never will be. But that's not the question, because it can be changed. And second is that despite learners often think that they understand the task correctly, it's often not the case. How many of you from this course have read that what it says in the curriculum about the learning goals? What are the goals that in the curriculum says that you will master after this course? How many knows them?
Because I always think
they're very general.
Yeah, very generally, but they are basically the things that in the curriculum they should be like, what are the things that you should learn, and what does the instructor expect that you will know and master after the course. And well, if learners do not realize that what are, for example, purposes of different courses, it's quite difficult then to focus on the relevant issues, what are there, which leads to the vague goals and plans. If you don't know what you are expected to learn, how can you plan your learning? Weak learning strategies and strategies choices. And also inaccurate monitoring. If you don't know how to monitor the progress towards task goals, it's kind of impossible then, or very difficult to engage to self-regulated learning. So, what are the key self-regulated learning processes? They are regulation of motivation and emotions, metacognition or cognition. Well, some people say that there is no such concept as metacognition, because every time you externalize your thinking, it's like cognitive act, not anymore metacognitive. But it depends on the perspective. And of course, is behavioral regulation, which includes time management and organizing learning environment and that kind of things. And there are also several ways how to do that in practice. Maybe in your own learning, but also with the use of technological applications. Okay. So I will tell this from my perspective, like how we have implemented different types of technological solutions in order to support regulated learning in different types of learning situations. But let's do first this mandatory part. So there is this concept of scaffolding, which originally means that you support learning, and when the learner reaches the appropriate level of the new skill, then the scaffolds are faded away. But that's not typically the case when using technology, because it's very difficult to determine when, for example, someone has mastered the new skill. So basically, despite we use the term of scaffolding very much, the original notion of it has changed a little bit. So there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different types of scaffolds. So first of all, conceptual scaffolds, and they focus on how learners can acquire sufficient domain knowledge. For example, in the science inquiry learning, there are different types of learning simulations that students can use, for example, to test that whether the hypothesis they have constructed works in practice. And then there are these procedural scaffolds. For example, that are kind of instructions embedded to the learning environment, and they refer on how the students are expected to use the learning environment and resources that there are at the hand. But then there are strategic scaffolds, and they focus directly on providing sufficient tools for the learners, what they can use to enhance their learning. Well, concept mapping tool, it's not so rare to use that during some courses. Also, well, I don't know, like Adobe PDF, the thing. It also involves tools that you can use, for example, to do notes or highlights for that. So very basic things. And then there are metacognitive scaffolds, which can assist in self-regulated learning from metacognitive perspective. For example, understanding the task, setting goals, and that kind of things. And motivational scaffolds. So there are very many different types of scaffolds that can be implemented in different types of learning settings and learning environments. But if you think all of these 8 that can be used, one might also think that what are the scaffolds that we use? Is it necessarily to use all of these, or is it too much? Or whether one can think that they can be kind of used in different times during the course. How? Automatically. So, computer-based learning environments. They can include the kind of embedded software tools that can be used to support specific processes of, for example, self-regulated learning. And this was about how to support self-regulated learning with software tools. So I will now introduce how we have used cognitive tools embedded to certain learning environments, and also regulation tools. So, 10 years ago, it was not a surprise in the learning sciences that learners of all ages need extensive support in their self-regulated learning, since self-regulated learning was defined as one of the key characteristics that define whether or when one succeeds in different types of tasks. But also, there was this kind of development of learning environments, and it was based on the theories of regulated learning, not on the technologies what was available. So, yeah, 10 years ago in Canada, they launched this Learning Kit project, where all the leading international researchers of self-regulated learning were involved. And they built this learning environment, which was built on self-regulated learning theories. It was very exceptional, even today, that some kind of learning environment is actually built on what we know about learning and not how to use technology. For example, Optima. Optima is very, very common learning environment 10 years ago. I heard that you are using that also in this course. Congratulations. So maybe you can find a ways how to self-regulate your learning with this restricted learning environment. Anyway.
So can we say that also we can apply the collaborative work skills also together with the self-regulated learning? Or will we use, for example, Optima? There are some self-regulated learning skills embedded there, for example. So can we join also the collaborative work skills?
In Optima?
In Optima or together in the learning environment,
yes,
where we can apply also the self-regulated learning.
Yes, well, in collaborative learning also, there are 3 types of regulated learning that can exist. Self, co, and socially self-regulation of learning. And each of them are important in terms of collaborative learning. I do attending to self-regulated learning course.
Yes.
Yes, okay. I think that there you will find more about these issues because we have to also kind of divide these topics that what are considered in different lectures. I'm not sure if I understood your question correctly.
Yes, I'm asking that can we apply the collaborative work together with the self-regulated learning in any learning environment?
In any
Or
way.
do we need to separate them or?
I don't know. I didn't still understand what was your question.
I think a good example of it is the theory course itself. Like now we have the individual task, which is basically self-regulated learning. But previously to that, we did a lot together and we're supposed to write collaboratively. So obviously they can happen hand in hand. And some collaborative learning would also, I mean, before you go to do something with the group, you have to study something on your own. You have to learn on your own. So they do go hand in hand.
Yeah.
They can go.
Yes, actually, this question came to my mind because you said that they set some learning environment for, they embed some
Yes.
self-regulated
Yeah.
learning skills there. So I'm just wondering, so can they also combine the collaborative work skills
Yes, they
together?
can. Well, okay. Sure, but you have to define first that what are the collaborative learning skills? How do you define them? Because collaborative learning skills, they also can include skills that enhance, for example, collaborative knowledge construction and are related on, for example, asking questions, argumentation, and counter-argumentation. But self-regulated learning, it doesn't directly focus on knowledge construction, but rather the processes that can support that. And yes, it's possible to implement also to the learning environment tools that can enhance collaborative learning skills and self-regulated learning skills or social learning skills. But the question is that what is enough and when enough is enough kind of. What are the activities that are valued for learners to accomplish certain types of tasks? Okay, I will give you an example how we did 10 years ago when we aimed to support students' regulation with computer-based tool developed in Learning Kit project. So we focused this research for elementary school students, and this is actually the interface of G-study. G-study it comes from the word general studying tool. And it was a web-based application where all the learning materials from all the students would be collected in so-called learning kits. And they were displayed in a web browser. So basically the students could collect any types of information they wanted from the net into their own learning kits. And then for those contents that they had collected, they were able to attach their notes collect the notes, for example, if they included some kind of keyword into the concept map. And also, they could do different types of highlights for their learning material, like, this is interesting, I don't understand, this is very important for my studying. So, all of the things or strategies they use to modify the learning material, it was also visible for them. So they could go, for example, that what were the issues that was not relevant for them, and what were the issues they considered very interesting. And also the teacher could monitor what the students did in the learning environment. And in terms of research, what was very brilliant was that this study logged each action and what the students did in that learning environment. For example, if they were frustrated, it could be seen, for example, when they scrolled the pages up and down, this doesn't work, and then highlighted the last sentence, I don't understand. So it was very, very brilliant learning environment. Of course, you have to remember that every time these learning environments, they are also embedded to real instructional designs and pedagogical designs. So also the students knew, they were aware that what they were expected to learn in different phases. Because the teacher, in his own pedagogical arrangement, made these things possible for them. For example, first they started with activating the prior knowledge of the topics. Then they kind of extended their knowledge in terms of, they went to the library and collected all the things or the relevant things they taught into their learning kits. They evaluated their learning. And also they rehearsed with the G-study learning environment the use of cognitive learning strategies. So, in practice, think about the target group was elementary school students. They hardly know how to use any types of learning strategies. So G-study was a perfect tool for that age group of students to practice the strategy use. And these types of tools that were embedded in G-study can be also considered as cognitive tools. Note tool, highlight tool, and concept map tool. But the support is different. For example, highlight tool was metacognitive support because it allowed students to monitor, for example, what they understand and don't understand, what they thought was interesting and or not. And concept map tool, I think it's both, it's kind of metacognitive and strategic support. But then we also, well, G-study, it was easy to modify the learning environment, so depending on what are the needs of the students, what the teacher wants to emphasize. But we also wanted to make students more explicitly aware of their own emotions in current learning situations. So we did the emotion awareness tool. And the principle is that if the learner is aware of his or her own motivation or emotion, it's possible to regulate that later on. So we asked there that the questions from the students is that, like, how do you feel right now? So the students can evaluate. They saw the smiley faces. I know this is a little bit like 10 years ago, but the principle is the most important. So we asked that, how do you feel right now? And the students said something like negative or positive. Then we asked the question why. And the students answered, because I know what I do. What do you do next? I will start to work. And then this time the most important for me is the student knew, have fun, do well compared to others, not to stress up, and do the same thing than others. You can think that these are some types of motivational goals. or attributes that students can give in terms of his or her working in the certain situations. But it's also important for learners to self-realize that how do you feel in this moment? What do you do? Why? Because, for example, one time one student said that, okay, I can't do anything. And when the question was that why can't you do anything, he had lost his sock during the gymnastics course. So he couldn't basically do anything before he found his sock. But if that thing wouldn't come up in the situation, the student would be very frustrated during the whole lesson and wouldn't be able to start to do anything. Okay, spend like a couple of minutes and think that what are, in terms of supporting self-regulated learning, the pros and cons of G-study learning environment. I think you already started that in some sense that this is individual learning environment, very individual. But yeah, you can like talk.
Excuse me,
Yes?
can I see just the topics or learning also that I always share? Can I see the topics or the main points or things about the main point we're going to
in terms of self-regulated learning, I just presented
What was the question? What is the question you're asking?
that you can, would you like to share your thoughts?
Yeah, why not?
Yes.
If you pay. You pay for it.
What you were discussing.
Not for free.
Yes.
We were discussing that, for example, when we work with Optima, it is something very useful that we can take a look at others' work, and then we can, for example, have an idea about others' writings. But the problem is that there are still a lot of gaps in technical proceeding. There are some technical problems. For example, when somebody works, one of the group members works, the other member cannot use Optima at the same time. So this is, so the other member has to wait until, in the same group, has to wait until, because he blocks the using that site until he's done with his work, then the other member can use it. So, and the other thing that there is gap in chatting, I think, so we try to communicate using other social networks, using, for example, Facebook, and using the Yahoo emails or emailing in order to communicate. So we need to fill these gaps using other applications or using other network, other social networks.
What a perfect example about this behavioral regulation in terms of you do and structure your own learning environment based on the needs that your group realize that might somehow prevent your group's collaborative working.
Yeah, sorry. Could you please repeat the question?
I think the perfect example about your group that you notice that in the optimal learning environment there is something that prevents your group to collaborate efficiently. So you were able to structure your own learning environment.
Yeah.
So basically regulate your own learning in order to do things more efficiently from your group's perspective.
Yeah.
Yes, I suggest you to use because we were in the same group. I suggest, and I've done this, I suggest you to use Microsoft Word or any other application to finish your whole task. And after this, go to Optima, edit, upload in just a few seconds. That's what I've done. And instead of opening the editor and blocking the whole group. So
Yes,
that was
because
my
I was looking beside for 1 hour.
I was teaming up the whole evening because of that.
He was still waiting.
Just use Microsoft Word, unfortunately.
Yeah. Okay.
If I come back to this G study, it was perfectly individual study tool. It was not social or collaborative in any sense. So that's why they worked out to come up with a new learning environment, N-study. N-study comes the words new study tool. When G-study focuses on individual, N-study took up these limitations in order to support more collaborative learning, since learning hardly ever is something that you do alone in your own head. So, N-study is an example of the learning environment that aims to support not only individual learning, but also collaborative learning. And we used N-study software in the address research project, where we wanted to examine how various forms of regulation emerge in individual and collaborative learning situations. Meaning that how motivation, metacognition, and behavioral regulation occur in students' self, goal, and socially self-regulation of learning. And in a similar way as in G-study learning environment, the pedagogical design of the course in terms of how the students use this collaborative learning environment was the key issue. So,
Can you explain what is the N-study?
yes, I will explain it, but would you like to hear that now, or can you wait for a minute? Because maybe before I introduce the learning environment, maybe it's also important to know something, that what is socially self-regulation of learning that we wanted to promote when we used in-study learning environment. So in the collaborative learning, there are multiple individuals who are working, but the problem is that each individual might have their own learning goals or their own ideas what the task is. Though when collaborating groups engage the socially self-regulation of learning, it's possible for them, at least to some extent, negotiate shared task understanding, shared goals, shared strategies, but also evaluate together that what went wrong and what didn't went so wrong in their collaboration. So basically socially self-regulation, or at least the phases that emerge in socially self-regulation of learning, are the same as in self-regulated learning. But in this time together, it requires each individual members in the group explicitly state to the other group members what they think the task is or the goals are. Sometimes there might be some types of problems Because not, for example, not necessarily all the group members want to master the task. Maybe some of the group members just want to do the task. So it's very difficult, especially if the group's outcome will be joint, to come up, if the group's outcome is kind of shared. And if group members have different types of learning goals, to come up with a joint solution that satisfies all the group members. So what's N-Study? New study tool. So it's basically same kind of learning environment than the G-study learning environment is. So basically it's it's quite a long time when we use this, but basically it's a kind of layer that you can use above your own web browser. So you can collect different items from the web also into there, and depending on, for example, what types of web pages you bookmark for your own learning environment, you can find them later on. And it also records traces of students' learning activities. But anyway, so in this specific course, each student had their own learning space where they could use their own collection of learning materials. But also the group had, besides individual learning space, a shared learning space where they could share what they have learned, the most important ideas, and also come up with together, for example, joint task they want to do. So, in practice, we wanted to support self-regulated learning and socially self-regulation of learning. And if in socially self-regulation of learning, each individual student's contributions are also needed. So in order to share their regulation, we first asked each individuals to describe your task. Then we asked what types of concepts and terms relate to this task. And then we asked the learners to set one goal for this task, individually. Because when the learners are individually aware of what they want to do, they can then start to negotiate what they want to do as a group. So we also had this shared planning tool for the students in the group shared learning space, where we ask the groups of learners to identify and describe what do they think is their collaborative task. And what are the main concepts and terms, what they want to do, and what is the group's shared and joint goal for the task. So, and also after the task we ask the same questions from the individuals and from the groups, because we also wanted to enhance this individual and self-evaluation. How was the task? So, what was important in this research project is that with the T-study learning environment, we were capable to support only the task execution phase, where the students use different types of learning strategies. But with this learning environment, we were capable to support the students' task understanding, planning and goal setting, strategy use, but also reflection. So basically all the dimensions of the regulated learning were taking account in this. So we also had embedded in the learning environment structured note tool. So we had, for example, question and answer with starting prompts for students to prompt the student to generate different types of notes, compare and contrast, and also the ICE note. That was kind of mandatory task for all the student groups to accomplish. First, they needed to identify the main ideas. What are they needed to learn? And that was also the same that was asked in the planning tool. And then we asked them to connect the ideas and make extensions. That how does this apply in the real world learning situation?